no rhythm. Quarterback Josh Dobbs overthrowing passes, throwing his players out of bounds. 3 trips to the red zone for the Cardinals, 0 touchdowns. All field goals. Zach, why the drop-off in production?
You see, the first thing I actually have here on my notes, not enough chemistry. This looked like the type of performance that you would have expected to have in that first game against Washington. A quarterback coming in, a week with practices, only about 6 of those, and then that's the type of performance you would have expected to see. Why the drop-off? I'm not sure if it's just because of Ernest Jones on the defensive side of the ball, 10 tackles for him. He had a great performance out there. But it just did not seem like Josh Dobbs was able to throw passes on the money. 2 wide open touchdowns that he did not hit on the money to Hollywood Brown. The interception, which we'll also talk about a little bit later, was not to Zach Ertz, was not on target. It was thrown behind him. There were a lot of passes like that. So I think it starts and it ends with Josh Dobbs because as a quarterback, you're the one that's manning that ship. And he was not able to really gather it together.
11 targets for both Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore, 4 receptions for both of them. Jody, It's been confusing the passing game because you have weeks where you've got rookie Michael Wilson having these great performances, and then for the following 2 weeks, he's MIA on the field.
Yeah, and Zach, to your point, you're right. It just felt like the chemistry wasn't there. And, in fairness, though, if Josh Dobbs hits on a couple of those, maybe it's an entirely different game. What's interesting is Matt Stafford really only went to Cooper Kupp, the one guy. And then on the other side for the Cardinals, Josh Dobbs hit 8 different targets. But like you said, the percentage was not good to Brown. It was not good to Rondale Moore. Trey McBride actually was the leading pass catcher, 4 catches for 62 yards. Michael Wilson had 3 catches for 62 yards. So he kind of was trying to spread the ball around. But again, when you cannot hit on those big plays, and that's what's a game of details, right? Because you connect on a few of those. You mentioned Ernest Jones. He had 15 tackles last week against the Eagles, was kind of banged up, really didn't practice all week. Had another big game. We know what Aaron Donald can do. Again, I wouldn't say, we always use the term kind of don't let him wreck the game. I certainly wouldn't say he wrecked the game, but he had his moments. And, in general, he elevates his other D linemen, right? We saw Young, the rookie, Byron Young, have a pretty good game as well. It was definitely a tough task for that offensive line. And so we saw that. Again, it does fall on Josh Dobbs. He is the quarterback. But when you have a bunch of D linemen and a linebacker and some different schemes that we saw Raheem Morris kind of change through the game, it can be tough for the quarterback. And I think the biggest thing is, again, we go back to basics sometimes on this show. When you get the lead, all of a sudden we saw the tables turn. Then they can tee off on Josh Dobbs. They can put some different things, schemes on that offensive line to make it harder, and they did.
One of the more impressive aspects we saw from Dobbs in the first month was ball security, smart decision-making. The last 2 weeks, it's been a different story. Again for the Cardinals, coming back on Josh Dobbs this past week, 2 costly turnovers. An interception, which was thrown behind tight end Zach Ertz, and that fumble, both of which led to points on the board for the Rams. It seemed like Dobbs was trying to force those connections because the rest of the offense wasn't clicking.
And that's the thing that I think Jody pointed on with the Rams. They had Cooper Kupp, and the Cardinals limited Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell. They really were not able to get much going. Knowing that the Cardinals have so many weapons, you shouldn't have to force so many different passes into spots that are not supposed to be there. There were also multiple passes that could have been turnovers, multiple times where players for the Rams dropped an interception or it was thrown right in front of them, just hitting the turf. So there were so many moments there, and I think the balance that James Conner brings to the running game, that was definitely missing in this one. We're going to talk a little bit about that running back by committee, but I know that he adds such an element to the offense that keeps the defense grounded a little bit because they have to be on their toes. This, in this case, was just not it for Josh Dobbs, forcing in pockets that were not ever supposed to be intended for.
James Conner was placed on IR with a knee injury. Sunday was the first of a minimum 4 games Conner has to miss. Entering the game against the Rams, the Cardinals were averaging 140 rushing yards per game. Not that much of a drop-off. Sunday's performance, 130. It was a different type of performance, though, a running back by committee, something the Cardinals weren't having to do when you have James Conner at the helm. It was Keontae Ingram making his return after missing 2 weeks with a neck injury. And we saw Damian Williams, who was recently acquired. That was his first performance. We didn't see much of Amari DiMercato. However, those were the 3 running backs the Cardinals were relying on. There was a difference, though. Even though the numbers are the same, right? 130 compared to the average 140, you didn't see the production near the end zone the way you have with James Conner. Again, no touchdowns. And when I talked to Keontae Ingram after the game, he took some of that blame and said, I understand the task at hand. I have to be better when I have the ball in my hands and crossing that plane.
Yeah, and Damian Williams, I thought, looked pretty good. There were some good moments in the run game. Again, Josh Dobbs, though, the leading rusher with a couple of runs on 3rd and 10 or more. 3rd down, Josh Dobbs was your most effective rusher there. But, yeah, I really like the fact that this offense under Drew Petzing is able to run the ball. I know it didn't show up on the score sheet here yesterday because of the fact that they couldn't score touchdowns. But that does take some pressure. It continues to take a little bit of pressure off of Josh Dobbs, and you want to stay balanced. And I think that will bode well for them in the future. But as we all talked about going into this game, the loss of James Conner was huge. You really can't replicate what he brings, his ability to and again, these other running backs were running hard. Mm-hmm. The effort was there. But there's a reason why James Conner is the starter and a guy that's been an All-Pro, and so it's going to hurt to lose him. Hopefully this will evolve over the next few weeks because he is going to be gone for a few weeks here.
Number 6 is one of those players that an opposing defense has to circle because, especially with Kyler Murray's absence, James Conner has kind of stood up as that player on the offensive side. He is that guy when it comes to making a play. And he adds that emotional, that energizing bunny element to the game that the Cardinals really did not have on offense, that they were truly missing. He's one of their emotional leaders on the offensive side of the ball. You've already been missing your emotional leader on the defensive side of the ball in Budda Baker. Yeah. So to take a hit by losing James Conner for at least the next 3 games definitely does hurt. I was just very confused by the lack of production Amari DiMercato had. I felt having the hot hand against the Cincinnati Bengals going into this one. I knew Keontae was going to kind of be that RB1 in place of James Conner, but I did not go into it with the expectation that Damian Williams was going to go become RB2 and get more touches than Amari DiMercato did. I mean, Jody, he was your player of the game last week, and to go into this one and basically be invincible was kind of surprising.
That's probably going to be an area this coaching staff will look at moving forward with this committee is when you're game planning, do you need to change the way you are using those running backs, the amount of snaps, and the situations you're using those players in? The Cardinals were consistent in trying to run the ball. The Rams, not so much. The first half, LA with just 5 rushing yards. However, they turned it around in the second half with 174 on the ground. That is a consistent week after week. If you are playing Arizona, it seems like the halftime adjustment to make is to run the ball because the Rams would end up in the second half alone with 2 touchdowns, 2 forced turnovers, and 174 rushing yards. It's the same story week after week, Jody.
Well, and it's interesting because for me, look, we all know the Rams don't run the ball much, and especially not when they're down. The percentage goes way down. I think it was kind of like a 65-35 anyway. And then when they're down in games, the analytics tell you it's something like 12% or something like that. So for them to go into the locker room at halftime and completely flip the script, and they talked about it after the game, a couple of O-linemen said, we didn't make adjustments, we wanted to make a statement, which is a nice way of saying, like, of course, you made adjustments, right? But I went into the game and actually mentioned the fact that I thought they would run the ball with Kyren Williams because even though the Cardinals have been pretty good against the run, I mean, why would you not? It just makes life easier if you can run the ball, right? It's easier on your quarterback. It's less of a chance of turning the ball over. There's just a lot of reasons why you might come out of the chute trying to run the ball, trying to test that defensive line and linebackers, and they didn't. And it worked out really well for the Cardinals because they were really they had kept the Rams out of the end zone for the entire first half. And then the second half came, and so again, I had said it on the pregame radio with Kyle Van Den Bosch. I mentioned Kyren Williams, and then felt kind of stupid through the entire first half. I'm like, Jody, you have no idea what you're talking about. Everyone else was so right. This is Sean McVay. He just wants to throw it. He wants to hit all his weapons. And then when they turned it around, and then I thought, well, it is football. You're going to try to use everyone on the field. It wasn't working for them, so it was a product of the Cardinals doing all the kind of crazy stunting at the line, right, which I love. Nick Rawlis trying to mix it up. Again, I know there's no victory in winning a half, but there is a little bit of moral victory in, like, hey, we were trying to confuse. It kind of worked out. So unfortunately, though, that fire, you can imagine what they were like going in there to when they get basically shut down in the passing game. They were hitting Cooper Kupp in the first half. I think he had 101 yards receiving, but Matthew Stafford had 134 overall. So it was really all Cooper Kupp. Couldn't get anything else going. And so, I'm sure they were pretty upset. And that was kind of the easy switch, was like, hey, let's just try to run it. And it worked. And it worked. I was surprised at how well it worked, because this defensive line, I know they're banged up again, and I know they've been thin since the beginning with some of those injuries that happened early in the season. But, they've played pretty stout against the run. It's almost like it was a little bit of an ambush. They were back on their heels, and it just worked. So credit the Rams coaches for that.
98-30. That's the second half total throughout these 6 weeks. 98 points the opposing offense has been able to put together, that the defense has given up, and only 30 that the Cardinals have able to been put on the board.
It's ugly numbers.
It's
right
an ugly number, and that in and of itself is one of those numbers that's an eyesore. That's going to stand out to a Nick Rallis and a Jonathan Gannon, a coaching staff that truly prides themselves off of defensive production. To give up 98 points in a total of 2-3 games, that's an incredible amount. And this team really has to figure it out, because we know opposing teams are going into the locker room at halftime saying, what adjustments do we need to make? The Cardinals need to start going into it with, what adjustments do we need to be prepared for? Because it seems like they've come into the second half slow on defense, and they've been able to give up all these explosive plays that this coaching staff harps on, week in and week out. And that's why Cooper Kupp was able to go off in the way that he did. And because of what Cooper Kupp's able to bring to the table, that's what allows the Kyren Williams to come in and have the type of second half performance he did, Dani.
Opening drive for the Rams in the second half, 9 straight run plays would end that drive with a touchdown pass to Cooper Kupp, who was Matthew Stafford's go-to player. 148 receiving yards and a touchdown for Kupp in just his second game back from coming off IR with the hamstring injury. It was interesting because entering Sunday's game, the Rams had that dynamic duo. It was the rookie Puka Nacua who was stepping up in Kupp's absence. Nacua had entered Sunday's game with almost 600 receiving yards, second most in the league. Almost a non-factor. Yeah. There was no need to. If you're throwing to Cooper Kupp and it's working against this Cardinals secondary, why would you change that?
Remember, he dropped a touchdown in the first half. Mm-hmm. It kind of looked like, seeing the replay, it's clear he could have had it, but he was kind of had to not dive, but it was perfectly placed, really. But he could have had a touchdown, and he didn't. And then, I just think Cooper Kupp took over the game, but. Yeah, it's just one of those things where they have two very talented guys there, and Puka being a late-round draft pick, I don't know that anyone really expected it, but boy, how timely was it for them with Kupp being out. And again, they had the hard schedule coming in, so you looked at them at 2-3, and you know that they had played the Eagles the week before, mm-hmm. I believe the Niners as well prior, so they had some tough defenses to go up against, but it's just they couldn't be denied. Obviously, the first half, again, you're right, Zach, that the numbers in the second half, something's got to change. And there were some questions about it, people asking, is it the conditioning? I don't think that it is that. I think it's, again, and this is one of those intangible things. So hear me out. You guys might say, Jody, again, you're wrong. But I think when you have a lot of players that haven't had a lot of NFL experience in second halves, in fourth quarters, in some crucial situations, on third down, on offense and defense, it's just hard. It's just harder, I mean, you're like Matthew Stafford, Josh Dobbs, Cooper Kupp, Michael Wilson. Again, it's a learning process in the NFL. And young players, while they might have great moments, and we've seen some, that's why we were excited, and we still are excited about what this team might be able to do. But when it comes to crunch time, I think that's the difference. It's just the experience level. You're
without some of those star players in those crunch time moments. On offense, Kyler Murray still on PUP, rehabbing that ACL. James Conner, who is now on IR. And on defense, your two starting safeties, Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson, both dealing with hamstring injuries. The bright spot in Sunday's 26-9 loss for Arizona was special teams. Yeah. Yet again, kicker Matt Prater, reliable as ever, 3 for 3 on field goals. And also that punt return. Very impressive by the special teams unit. 2 players who were elevated for Sunday's game, safeties Joey Blount and Bobby Price, who we haven't seen a lot of this season. It was Blount who had that forced fumble on the punt return, and Price with the recovery, which led to points on the board, albeit a field goal for the Cardinals. Still impressive from this special teams unit, Zach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for Matt Prater specifically, this was the Matt Prater game, just getting those 3 field goals in. And he was the Cardinals' only point production. He also jumps up to 18th in all-time points in the NFL's career list, which is absolutely incredible with over 1,700.
So is he the player of the game? Is that what we're saying here?
I think he might.
Collectively, the player
Matt
of the
Prater,
game.
congratulations.
It's kind of,
And a 55-yarder, which again, kind of automatic for Matt Prater, but not for most people.
Unanimous player of
74th.
the game on Morning Scramble.
And that's Matt Prater's 74th, I believe, career all-time kick, field goal made when it's 50 yards or more,
crazy.
which is an absolutely ridiculous total right there. Yeah. But I think on special teams, we mentioned Joey Blount, and I have to give him some kudos because he allowed one play to happen, the first punt return. He went back 5 yards behind the returner, I guess assuming he was going to make that fair catch, and they were able to break loose for either a 19 or 29-yard run out of that. And you saw Jeff Rodgers on the sideline really get into him, as he should.
You kind of thought, what is he doing?
Exactly, as any good coach will do, going after their player to say, hey, that's not acceptable, that's not the standard behind it. Because everyone just goes into it assuming, all right, it's easy enough to just raise the hand up and it's a fair catch. But for him to go in for that next punt and force that fumble, really crackle the guy and force him to fumble it, and Bobby Price to come in and recover it, come out of the pile with his helmet off and screaming as we see in the picture. I mean, he was really into it. So got to give some kudos over there to the special teams.
Blount punched that ball out. It was a great performance.
He took him down. Rey Mysterio from the WWE was in the house. I mean, it was a old WWE
Bobby
takedown.
Price, announcing his, presence there. I think a lot of fans were probably like, Bobby Price? When did he get here? But that's what this team needs. Contributions from everyone. And especially on special teams, we know what a great job that Jeff Rodgers does week in and week out, year after year. And so trying to give the team a spark. And again, that's the turnover where he talked about building momentum. Get a field goal. Well, it's great, but that was another situation where if you get a turnover like that, you want to build momentum by scoring a touchdown.
Plenty of opportunities Arizona not fully able to take advantage of. Zach, when you were watching the game, at what point did you realize this might be difficult to come back on? What was your turning point?
I think the turning point, and this is when I think all of us kind of threw our heads back, was in that fourth quarter. Josh Dobbs, first play of the fourth quarter, throws that interception behind Zach Ertz that I alluded to earlier. You go into it, the clock hits 0, and you want to prepare the most perfect play that you possibly could have. You're already in the red zone. You haven't been able to put up that 4-point swing we talked about and get that touchdown instead of the field goals. You haven't been able to do that. And Josh Dobbs was so solid the first few games when it came to possession of the ball, not turning the ball over. And in the past 2 weeks, which we discussed earlier, has really hurt the team as a whole. So my opinion, that turning point was that interception, because I think also Zach Ertz was in risk of losing his 122 consecutive catch streak. And that was that one play where you're like, okay, he could possibly start getting Ertz a little bit more involved. You never want to start getting your star tight end in the fourth quarter. You never want to start getting him involved that late into the game. But that pass behind him when he turned the ball over, that was the turning point in my opinion.
Yeah, and what's interesting was you talked about the break between third and fourth, and so you have time to gather yourself. You have time to kind of reset. And the play before that was, I believe, a 22-yard gain to Hollywood. And Hollywood, you love to see that because you're like, not only was it on the money, Hollywood had gotten open. You're like, okay, here we go. Is Josh Dobbs going to be able to kind of slice and dice through this defense a little bit? And then for that next play to be an interception, like you said, thrown behind Zach Ertz. And again, those two just can't seem to get on the same page. Again, maybe it's as simple as, Josh Dobbs just needs to make a better throw there. But it's a connection that we kind of thought we would have to rely on because Zach is one of the few veterans in this group, Hollywood Brown as well. But, I mean, you look at a lot of new pieces on this offense, and it's a little bit disappointing. It certainly was disappointing in that moment, and I agree with you. It absolutely was the turning point.
Zach Ertz with 22 yards on 2 receptions in Sunday's loss. That following drive after the interception was the fumble in which, again, the Rams would go on to score. So 2 consecutive weeks with costly turnovers, something that's a little new for Josh Dobbs, something that this offense, not just Dobbs, this offense as a whole, is going to have to get back on and being smart with the ball and having that good, just being smart with it and having ball security and not turning the ball over. Let's go ahead and take out the whiteboards for songbirds.
And they thought we weren't going to bring out the whiteboards today. Come on.
I know.
It wouldn't be a morning
think
scramble.
Think of a song that embodies the way you are feeling, either whether it was during watching the game, today on this Monday morning.
I had a lot of not very good feelings after this game, to be honest.
Jody, you're first. You can go ahead and get started while Zach and I finish.
I'm just going to go with like my first thought with the red zone being so tough. Unfortunately, the red zone, which should be a place of happiness, right? A place where you make things happen. Unfortunately, it was a danger zone yesterday, 0 for 3. Plus, I just like Danger Zone.
It's a good song.
It's a good song, yeah. Top Gun, right? I should have thought this out, right? Is it Kenny Loggins? I'm totally off. Okay, just checking.
Last week I didn't know Kate Bush, and that was.
There you go.
Yeah, you said TikTok song.
That's a
That's an easy
TikTok
one,
song.
Danger Zone. Yeah. What do you got?
All right, so I was feeling very confused this morning about how I felt about it. So I turned to Chad Burns, who gave up the title for Songbirds, and I was like, Chad, how should I feel today? And he said, well, you know what? Let's go a little bit Hollywood with it. So we went Still Dre, and that's in parentheses, by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. And I think the reasoning for it is because there's still, like, while we are very frustrated with this result, and we've been frustrated week after week with the second half collapse, really, there's still so much hope that comes with it. These guys are fighting in this facility, and there's no doubt about it. They're not giving up. They went into it hearing what all the national media has had to say about it. And while the results have started to match up to what the national media said about this Cardinals team, I think they're still earning a lot of respect across the league, because you have Josh Dobbs that did have to jump into a situation, and while his play has not been where we want it to be, he's jumped into a situation where he's kind of assumed that leadership role. There's still a lot of hope. There's still a bright future ahead of this team. Regardless of the wins and loss column, this team is really kind of bonding together with it. We spoke with Josh Woods earlier on in the week, last week, when he said it was that flower analogy that Nick Rollis gave. It's the roots where it all matters. It's not the pretty part of the flower, but it's the roots that ultimately blossom into what we want it to become. As you see there, 6 tackles, 1 tackle for loss for Josh Woods. He had a really solid game jumping in. He was very energized as well. But it's the foundation that comes about that I think still is pretty hopeful for the Cardinals.
I like that you're going to our team illustrator and Chad Burns. It's a team effort here on Morning Scramble. Chad normally has something to say about my drawing, so we'll see what he has to say about today. I went with Manic Monday, which is actually by the Bengals, and when I looked that up this morning, I learned that the song was actually written by Prince. And so I drew a little crown in the corner because that makes a lot more sense than trying to draw something for either a Monday or the Bengals for the band. So we went with a little crown because the song was apparently written by Prince.
Very cute.
I went with Manic Monday because that's just what it feels like. I have to be honest, I understand talking about the moral victories and that this team is putting together great first halves. That's not going to win you games. You have to start stringing together an entire game, 4 full quarters of good football, something Gannon even talked about post-game Sunday that this team is not doing. That's why it's the Manic Monday. I'm not feeling too optimistic at the moment. And just, you need to really look at where you are right now, not just looking ahead, even though that is a line in the song of I wish it were Sunday. And I'm not talking about this past Sunday, but maybe the Sunday ahead when you get a new chance to turn things around against the Seahawks. There's frustration because you can see the potential with this team. And not just potential. You've seen how well this team has played under certain circumstances, but you're not getting a full game out of them. And that's something that this coaching staff needs to figure out why that's the case and to change that there.
I think they just need some pieces, right? They need some pieces at key positions. They have the tough injury situation. When you don't have Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, again, I go back to that win there in 2021 where the Cardinals just put on a clinic and they really harassed the receivers. Especially, I remember specifically a hit from Jalen Thompson on Cooper Kupp in that game that I felt changed the entire game. And Cooper Kupp is not a guy that has a lot of fear. Okay, this is a guy that is not afraid to go over the middle, but it changes the game. And when you don't have guys like Thompson and Baker out there, and hopefully Budda's coming back soon, we'll get updates on that throughout the week that these guys will keep you updated on. But it is tough, but there's hope because. And the other interesting thing is when you're 1-5 and you're getting outscored in the fourth quarter, but why do we feel this way about the coaching? And I think it's because you see them trying everything that they can to, win the game. And we're seeing a lot of it show up in the first half. And the fact that that's working for me is a positive. I understand it's fading as the game goes on for the reasons I outlined before, lack of experience, sometimes attrition, sometimes injuries. And they need to learn to finish. But I think we're all feeling. By the way, it's a great song, Manic Monday. I remember that song. Susanna Hoffs, so We're in our feelings a little today, and that's okay. It's all right. We got to stay upbeat. We got to stay positive.
The beauty about the National Football League, we got a chance to do it all again next week.
Absolutely, and there's a chance that you get your safeties back. Jalen Thompson was not placed on IR. Sunday was the first game he's missed with that injury. That's a good sign, not placing Thompson on IR. There's a chance he's able to come back this week. Budda Baker has now missed 4 games on IR, 5 total. However, he's now missed the minimum with his hamstring injury. There's a chance he's able to come back. That's a little hope, a little optimism when the Cardinals travel for their second straight divisional road game this upcoming week. It's against the 3-2 Seattle Seahawks. As Jody mentioned, we will have coverage all week long leading up to that matchup from players and coaches and looking ahead. Stay locked in on azcardinals.com. Thanks so much for joining us here on Morning Scramble. For Jody Jackson and Zach Gershman, I'm Dani Sureck. We'll catch y'all right here next week, Monday morning, 10 a.m.